Welcome to the Washdown podcast, episode number 99. And tonight I am talking with retired RCMP officer Laurie White. And Laurie has a very inspirational and interesting story, and we had a great conversation. So I'm not going to give you guys too much detail. You're just going to have to listen to the podcast. But I had a great time. We had a great conversation. Hopefully you guys learned some stuff from it. So yeah, like and subscribe and all that stuff. And here's episode number 99 of the Washdown podcast with special guest Laurie White. Oh, well, I guess it did it a little bit faster than it normally does. Usually I hit that record button and it takes a little second for it to think about it and then go, oh yeah, hey, now we're recording. So Laurie, welcome to the show. Thanks for agreeing to come on. I'm glad that Mike could connect us. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, and we'll just get into this.
Sure. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to come on here. It was a good chance meeting with Mike down at the Wounded Blue conference. So thank you for having me. So my name is Laurie White. I am a retired Royal Canadian Mounted Police Sergeant, and I retired about 3 years ago from that. And the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the RCMP, is the federal police force here in Canada. So I'm zooming in today from just outside of Vancouver, British Columbia, where it is lovely and an awesome fall day. So here I am.
Fantastic. So how many Dudley Do-Right jokes did you hear whenever you were at the conference?
You know, it's so funny. I don't know that I've even heard that name for 15 years, and I heard it about 6 times there. So that just goes to show you the differences in our experiences and our awareness of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police.
Exactly. Well, I mean, even though, Canada and the United States are right next to each other, there's a lot of similarities, I think, but there seems to be a lot of differences too about, just your police force, your military, your firefighters, and all that stuff.
Yeah, I think you're right. There definitely are, and certainly the guns and all that. That's a much different situation in the States versus here as well. So it was an eye opener. That was my first time presenting in the States, and I was so grateful for the opportunity to expand my connections and meet some new people. So it was a really good experience.
Cool. So let's get on with the reason why you're here. So I know you wrote a book about your experiences. So just start from the beginning. Like, why did you want to be a cop, and specifically in the RCMP?
Okay, so I am not one of those people who grew up with a very committed focus on becoming a police officer. And sometimes I feel like I need to sort of explain that a little bit differently. I grew up in Ontario, about an hour outside of Ottawa. And where I grew up, the RCMP has a different profile because while we're the federal police force, so we're all across the country in different provinces, we do different roles. So there's federal roles, there's provincial roles, and then there's municipal roles, essentially. And so where I grew up, we had our own municipal force. I also lived slightly outside of that town. And so there was a provincial police force as well. And then there was the RCMP, because we live, actually where I grew up is right on the New York State border. And so you could see the states from our town. And so when I was growing up, I saw the RCMP in mostly plainclothes kinds of jobs, the federal enforcement type stuff, like not the day-to-day general duty kind of uniforms. And so I actually went off to university after high school to become what I thought was going to be a phys ed teacher. And then I changed my tune when I was in 3rd year university. I was substitute teaching at the high school that I had gone to. And of course, I was only 21, so I wasn't a whole lot older than some of the kids that I was substitute teaching for.
And, probably a senior when some of them were freshmen.
Yeah. And so it was quite an experience this one day. And I always joke and say, this is the day that I decided to become a police officer. It actually wasn't in hindsight, but it's kind of a good story anyways. So I had a 75-minute class of grade 9s. There were 23 boys and 3 girls. So there was a lot of sort of puberty level boys and testosterone in that class. And of course, no material left for the 75 minutes that I was there to entertain these students. So it was a lot to try to keep them quiet and keep them contained in this classroom with the door closed. And finally the bell rings and I'm thinking, oh my God, thank God, that was a lot. Like, there was a lot of shenanigans happening. So I turn around and I'm about ready to turn off the light in the classroom. Class is filing out. And all of a sudden, one of the boys who had been very vocal hauled off and just whacked me on the ass. And I was shocked. And he tears off down the hall, pretty excited with himself that he did that to a 21-year-old teacher. And I, of course, tore off down the hall after him. And I catch him and I grab him with the scruff of the neck and throw him up against the locker. And I'm kind of like, and I don't really know what to do with him. So I joke and say that's the day I decided that teaching was maybe not for me and maybe police officer would be a good career fit. It wasn't. I didn't do anything to him. And I actually continued on after that. And I finished my undergrad degree, got my master's degree, and promptly moved back home with my parents. So that was not exactly what I had in mind. That 23 was to be bartending, back to substitute teaching. I was a skating coach and I was a fitness instructor. And so I was very busy, but none of those jobs were things that I saw myself doing long term. So it was pretty demoralizing, really, because I had done 2 degrees in 5 years. I was really focused and had worked really hard, but I just didn't see a lot of hope. And I keep a file still to this day of what I call my PFO letters. I'm allowed to swear on here, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's the internet.
Okay. Because that's what I thought. So the PFO letters are my please fuck off letters. They are the letters that when I was applying to every job under the sun, I was just getting denied, declined. Like, no, it was so hard on my self-esteem. And so it was a really frustrating time. I thought that I'd done all the right things. I thought that I had made all the right choices. I thought that I had done all the things that you're supposed to do for life to kind of fall into place. And it wasn't. But that's actually when I met somebody who was he was an RCMP officer in my gym that I was teaching at. And he said, Laurie, you're fit, you're into, exercise and stuff. You got a background in this and you're outgoing. Like, have you ever considered policing? And I really hadn't given it much thought. So at his encouragement, with his encouragement, I looked into it a little bit more and I applied. And by August of 1995, I was at our training academy, which is in Regina, Saskatchewan, where you go for 6.5 months to live in paramilitary style barracks. Like, I had 31 other women in my bedroom. And I didn't shower alone for 6 months. And it was a big eye opener. But once I was there, I was just so devoted and so passionate about it. I was really keen. I really felt like I'd made the right choice, even though I wasn't one of those people who had, as a child, said, I'm always going to become a Mountie.
Right. So is it in Canada, is it like hard to get a teaching job? Is that like one of those things that are just kind of locked down for a long time? If you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, actually, so you have to go to teachers college, and I had decided after that incident in the school that I was no longer going to become a teacher, and so I switched and did a master's instead.
Okay.
So I had some other thoughts on what I would do with a phys ed degree and a master's in gym, but they didn't pan out either. So so I don't know if I would have been able to find a teaching job had I pursued that, but I would have needed a different degree.
Okay. Yeah. I get you.
Yeah.
So you go to, you meet somebody at the gym who suggests, hey, come be a Royal Canadian Mounted Police guy. And
yeah.
So, I mean, at the time, I'm sure it may be different now than it was then, but is it like hard to get hired, or did your degrees help? Or because I know that some places here, they want you to have a criminal justice degree for that kind of law enforcement and all of that stuff.
Well, I think it's like all the agencies out there now. I think it probably helped at that time that I was female. I don't really know what the standards exactly were. And I know that they will shift sometimes too, depending on what the needs of the communities are and things. But it may have helped that I was a female, but I did have 2 degrees and I also was 25. So it wasn't like I was 18 with no life experience. I was well into my 20s. And so, and I was a hell of a good choice, frankly.
Hey, you're selling it to me. I believe it. So you get done with training. So you said 6 months in the academy, and then what, you have like a field training you know, FTO time of a year, 6 months, 18 months? And then are you on your own, or are you working with a partner, or does that just vary depending on what you're doing, I guess?
Yeah, so those are good questions, actually. So when you finish it was just over 6 months in Regina, you get assigned your community. And when you sign on the dotted line, like when you graduate training and you sign on the dotted line, you're signing up to go wherever they send you in Canada. So it's a big country.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of different kinds of roles that you can do. Like you can go way up north, to very remote fly-in kinds of communities, or you can go to Surrey, which I actually happen to live in Surrey, which is the biggest municipal detachment that they have in the country. And there's, I don't know, I think 700 or 800 members here. So
Dang.
it's you know, it's a city four. So
Yeah.
there's a very broad spectrum of things that you could possibly be doing. So while I was in training, they say, okay, write down your top 3 choices. And so in terms of provinces, so I had chosen Ontario, second was Alberta, and third was British Columbia. I'm in British Columbia.
Yeah. Is that one of those things where it's like you pick, but we're just going to send you wherever we want to anyway?
Yeah, I don't even know why we go through that, honestly,
Yeah.
because I think it's probably changed now. I mean, this is going back several years, right? But I think it's probably changed now because I think they recognize that the amount of money that they spend to train us, it's kind of foolish to not sort of work with us in order
Mhm.
to make everybody happy, right? Because you end up, the retention factor is important. And if you
Oh,
feel,
absolutely.
you know, send somebody to some community that they are so isolated, feel alone, feel disconnected, all those things, I mean, they're going to quit and go join some other agency. So I think we're probably getting better at that, but I'm retired now, so I can't really speak for sure to it, but I would think that we're doing a better job of that. So when I was getting close to the end of my training, I knew at this point that I was going to British Columbia. And then I remember standing at attention in our drill hall in my, you know, and standing there, and they always called you by your last name, and they said, White, Kitimat. And that was my posting. And I'm like, where the hell is Kitimat? So I quickly ran to a paper map because, of course, it was 1990, early 96.
Mm.
So I went to a paper map. And if you're not from BC, I don't know, I thought Vancouver pretty much was BC. And so I started doing concentric circles around the city of Vancouver, and I'm not seeing anything called Kitimat. And then I went north, 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 and I'm like, okay, there it is. So that's what my first posting was, Kitimat, British Columbia, on the, you know, the West Coast, and the very, you know, the very West Coast, but up north in British Columbia.
So pretty close to Alaska then? Is that
Not too,
like,
yeah, actually not too far.
yeah.
And it, yeah, and so it was an eye opener. It was maybe 10,000 population, very kind of industrial town. There's a pulp and paper mill, and an aluminum smelter, and a methanol plant. Those were the 3 main employers at the time.
Mhm.
So many of the people in the community were making a lot more money than I was. Lots of disposable income, lots of people graduating high school, and kind of the expectation was that they would go to work at one of those places and make that kind of money. That was there were lots of good career opportunities within those industries. So it was a bit of an eye opener in many, many ways.
Like, I might have signed up for the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how long were you on until you got shot?
So when I went there, it was about 2.5 years. And in those 2.5 years, at the very beginning, or close to the very beginning, they actually changed our shift schedule. So our shift schedule was 10 months of almost 10 months of straight night shifts for me. And so what they did was they assigned certain people to night shifts and certain people to day shifts. And I was one of the night shifts. So at that time I was 26, for a young single female in a northern community with no family, I didn't have any friends, of course, just the people, like my colleagues slowly became my friends. But certainly when I went there, I didn't have any. And it was a lot. So I couldn't get involved in some of the things that I wanted to do. I couldn't really play on a baseball team. I couldn't play on a curling team. Like I just couldn't participate in some of those things. So my quality of life was kind of lacking. And it was a struggle. And so I thought, okay, if this schedule keeps up, like I can't do it. So what I did was I thought, okay, if I give myself to 1 year, then at least I will not consider it quitting. if I leave after 1 year. Like 1 year is a fair amount of time to say, all right, like I've done my part here, but this is not sustainable.
Yeah. If it's not for you at that time, then yeah. But I think that's a fair amount of time to try really any career, and you can put the fire service in that as well. And we've had this conversation, and especially whenever it pertains to mental health and stuff of, the common saying is, well, if you can't handle it, then you don't belong in this career field. But we kind of typically look down on those people that, do decide, hey, this isn't for me, I'm going to go do something else, whenever we should be like, oh, you know what? That's them being self-aware and realizing they could be happier doing something else.
Agreed. And it's the totality of the situation, right? Like everybody brings a whole bunch of different things to the table.
Yeah, exactly.
If I would have moved there with a spouse or a couple of kids or something like that, I might have had a tremendous experience right off the bat, but that wasn't what I was bringing to the table at that time in my life. And so I think we need to take a step back sometimes and look at all the factors and all the dynamics before we wash our hands of the person and say, okay, well, they're a quitter or they're not cut out for this job.
Yeah, absolutely. You're 100% correct.
So I got to a year and made it to, to there, and the schedule had changed, and I was really feeling like I was kind of finding my groove, and I had met some people. I was able to slowly start getting involved in some of the sports and activities that I like to do, and I started doing a lot of the sex crime investigations, which I think as a female member often land on your desk anyhow. But I actually really liked that kind of work. I thought it was a really good fit for me. So it was one of those files that led me to my shooting a couple of years later. So in September of 1998, I had enough information to be able to get some charges laid, or a charge laid against a 44-year-old man in town. He was a suspected sex offender. And so I had had a victim come forward, and he had gone for his first appearance in September of 1998. And I think because it was a small town, I was, young myself, fairly approachable, fairly outgoing. A lot of the kids in the community knew me. I did school liaison as well. So I was pretty well known. And I think some of the other younger girls and other victims felt more confident in coming forward now that the initial complainant had come forward. So it was kind of one of those snowball effects, right? Well, if she felt comfortable talking to Laurie, I'll go talk to Laurie too. And so I was able to get some more information and some more evidence to go back and lay some more charges. And so on November 27th of 1998, I, along with two partners, attended his residence, and he lived in a townhouse complex. And I was on the right-hand side of the door underneath the carport. And a partner was on the left-hand side, and we had a third partner around the back of the unit. And we're just standing there, and all of a sudden I hear this pop, and it was like a balloon popped right beside my ear. And it was like an instant reverberation in my head. And it was kind of like an instant disconnect as well in terms of my hearing. And so my ears were buzzing, like ringing louder than I joked before and said it was louder than they rang when I was at the Rolling Stones concert in 1998 or 19. Yeah, it was so loud. It was a crazy feeling of vibration in my head. And as I looked ahead of me, I saw a black hole in the white door, and I smelled the familiar smell of gunpowder. And I tasted the gritty residue on my tongue, and I felt it, and I looked down and I see this smoke coming from my shin, and it was sort of gray, black, white smoke. And I looked down, and then that's when I realized like all my senses had kicked in, but my brain hadn't figured out like I've been shot. And I said that to my partner. I said, I've been shot. And he's like, what? And I said, I've been shot. And he's like, lie down. So I did.
It seems logical.
Yep.
That's so crazy that like that disconnect can happen, between your brain and your body, and how powerful that can be.
Yeah, it was incredible, like reciting kind of what happened in that sort of systematic way. It was literally a split second, right? But I mean, to me, it felt like time kind of slowed down. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people who go through a traumatic incident will tell you the same thing. And so I laid down. It was my right shin that had been shot, and I laid down, and tucked in sort of my right leg to my left leg, as we do when we're injured. We hug everything close to our core.
Mm-hmm.
And my partner that was in beside me, he quickly looked and he dragged me by the back of my gun belt and by the back of my collar and around a vehicle that was nearby to kind of get me out of the line of fire. And he said, okay, you've got one bullet hole to your leg. And I hear him go on the radio. And here in Canada, the worst radio code possible is 1033. It means an officer down, and it means everybody drop what they're doing and hurry. This is urgent. This is life and death. And so that was really the first thing that registered with me, was that 1033 code. And so that's why my book is called 1033. An officer down steps back up, but I'll get to that after. But I have to explain that because I know the codes are different in the United States. So
yeah.
So he goes out on the radio, and then I hear the sirens, and the firefighters and paramedics in that town, they do the same job. And so of course we're all the first responders, so we all know each other, and it's a small town, so we're all kind of friends. And two of them come running in, like they parked their ambulance just not too far away, but a little bit out of the line of fire, of course. And they came running in, and I could just see their eyes were both wide. And one of them grabbed me underneath my knees, and one of them grabbed me underneath my armpits and just like hustled out. Like they just ran with me, sprinted back to the ambulance. And I remember obviously the sirens going, and I get down to this small hospital that's in this community, and they're making all those arrangements for me to head to Vancouver. And so, it's a serious trauma case when you're going to Vancouver on an emergency situation. The medevac was getting ready to take me. And I just remember all the chaos kind of ensuing around me. And someone was taking off my rings, and they were cutting my clothes. And somebody came in and said, Laurie, do you have any dying declarations? And I'm thinking, what the fuck is a dying declaration? I don't remember that from training. That's a lot.
Like,
I didn't know
I
it was
just
dying.
got shot in the shin.
Yeah. And so when that got said, I remember like patting down my torso and my hips and thinking, did I get shot somewhere else too? And I just didn't, I was just so hyper focused on the leg one that I just wasn't aware. So that was highly stressful. Just added another layer to an already very stressful time. And I was conscious for maybe 4 hours, I think, while they were making all those arrangements and dealing with, the trauma situation. And then I lost consciousness. But I remember in those hours thinking to myself, okay, I have to blink. Like if I can blink, then that's proof that I'm alive. Like if I close my eyes, I'm not sure what that means, because someone just said dying declaration. I don't know. Am I dying? I don't know. But if I can keep my eyes open, then clearly I'm not dead.
Yeah, exactly. It took them 4 hours for you to medevac you.
That's my understanding. Like it takes a lot to that's my understanding. Well, it didn't take me 4 hours. I think it was several hours, I don't know, a couple hours to get that all organized. And then by the time I landed there, I think it was about 4 hours that I was conscious.
Okay.
So not 4 hours necessarily to get the medevac going. It was like the whole duration of, getting shot, getting down there, getting the ambulance ready, and then getting down before I lost consciousness.
Right. I get it. And well, it's pretty vast distance. It's not like, you're on the outskirts of Vancouver and it's, a 5-minute helicopter ride. So
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
We don't have those resources just sitting there at the ready either. That's exactly right.
You're the federal police. Why not?
Yeah. Well, that's a come from like the north, right? And that's the thing, like even the emergency response team, right? We don't have a team just sitting there in the community waiting to go. And so those guys, gals, they're coming from all over, like a big geographical distance, right? In order to get together and then make a cohesive approach, right? So there's a lot of resources to activate.
Yeah. And I think it's easy for people, especially if you live in a metropolitan area, to kind of forget that of, oh, well, it's a town of 10,000, so they should have these resources or these resources. But you don't really think about, well, it's just a town of 10,000. Like it's not a suburb of a city with 10. It's, it's a standalone town way out away from everything. So
exactly. If we had to call for like the dog to come, I mean, they had a very broad area to cover. So God forbid you need them over here, and they're like literally hundreds of miles away, right? That's just how it is. Yeah. So you're right. Like people don't really recognize that it's not an urban area. It's a very vast, rugged kind of terrain type of a section of the province. So
yeah. So,
So I come to.
okay.
After about apparently like a 8-hour marathon surgery, and I am delivered the news that my injury was so severe to my leg that my lower leg had to be amputated to save my life. And so
Mm.
my leg was amputated about 5 inches below my right knee. So the bullet was from a sawed-off .303 rifle. And those kinds of bullets, to my knowledge now, when they hit something hard, so my shin bones, they mushroom and pretty much took my whole calf with it. And so what they were trying to do in that trauma surgery was they were trying to restore circulation to my foot to see if they could, of course. And so in doing that, they would take chunks of my inner left leg thigh vein to try to connect the circulation and keep the circulation going to my foot, but they were unable to. And so in that, not that it really matters, but it goes to show you I have a scar from literally the top of my groin until the inside of my knee. So they tried for a long time. That whole section of vein, which is, you know, this far, is gone, because that's how many times they were trying to restore the circulation, and they just were unsuccessful. And so that was the final result, was an amputated leg. So I just remember sitting there in the hospital, of course, very drugged, very groggy. It was middle of the night. I think it was 3 or 4 in the morning. And I just couldn't even wrap my head around that. Like amputation, like it was such a foreign word. So it was a lot to digest.
Yeah. How long until you came out of all the drug fog and it really hit you? And then what did you do? And what resources did they give you?
I think they did a pretty good job. And considering it was 1998, I mean, I really do think that they did a pretty good job. I mean, I was very fortunate. The surgeons and the healthcare I got in Vancouver, that was like tremendous. They brought in a psychiatrist. You know, I'm not exactly sure of the timing, but a few days in to meet with me. But I mean, I was very drugged still, and it was more just like, oh, no, she seems to be doing as well as she could be under the circumstances. But if she needs something, reach out. That's fair. But because my situation was really high profile, and again, it wasn't really, the internet wasn't exactly in the same, it wasn't as prominent in our lives in 1998 as it currently is. And so I was very high profile in a pre-internet stage, really.
Yeah.
And but I did a press conference, and I mean, I felt like this obligation to society that I should be doing this. It was so crazy. I look back on it now and I go, I know, it was so weird. But I was all over the news, right?
Healing and recovering. Take your time.
Well, I was in there for almost 3 weeks. But I was heavily, heavily drugged, especially at the very beginning. And I had several more procedures too, to try to close up the end of my stump and to deal with debriding and getting the bullet fragments and the bone fragments out and kind of clear out some of the tissue. So it was definitely a long, shitty time. Very, very painful physically, clearly, but also psychologically. It was just a lot. And it took me many days to even look at what was left over my leg. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't do it.
Yeah, that had to have been, I mean, especially for somebody who is active and sports oriented, and, you know, that was a big part of your life, to lose a limb or part of a limb. I mean, I can't even imagine what your headspace was like at that time.
I think it was easier for me, you know, in some respects, as much as I kind of laugh at the media circus that it was probably kind of good for me, because it was a good distraction. It was kind of an easy way to um, like kind of play hostess, if you will, in the hospital bed when people were coming in and all these agencies, and I was feeling, oh my gosh, there's like I feel so much gratitude for all the support that I'm getting. Like I really should be awake or put on some lip gloss for this next visitor, that kind of stuff.
Wait, I gotta do my hair and my makeup.
Yeah. And then you'd be seriously like pressing that friggin' button, the red button, when you're on like morphine drips and stuff, and you're just desperate for that next fix of medication to try to like comfort you somewhat in this crazy pain that you just couldn't control. Yeah. So it was maybe good in hindsight, right? Like at the time, you just don't really know. You're just going through the motions, but it was probably a good thing for me personally, because I am a social person. And I think it did kind of help me deal with some of that craziness at the start.
So when did you make up your mind that you weren't going to let that stop you and that you were going to go back to work?
Well, the jury's out on that. My mom thinks that I was, hell bent on doing it right from in the hospital, and I may well have been, but I don't know that realistically and practically I really believed that. So I may have been like, rah, 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 I'm going to go back to work. But I don't know that I actually believed it until quite a bit later. But what I will say is there was a police officer who had lost his leg to cancer 3 months prior to me losing mine. And before I'd really looked at what was left over of my leg, someone had arranged for him to visit me in the intensive care. And I'll never forget him coming in, and he was so he had a big personality and just big smile. And he came in with those old school tearaway pants, the ones.
Uh-huh.
You're too young, you wouldn't know. Um,
Oh no, I'm familiar with those pants. I was a basketball player, so I wore a lot of those pants over the years.
yeah, you would have then.
Yeah.
Well, he came in with a pair of those, and he was hell bent on going back to work. And in order to go back to work, he had been told that he had to do the PAIR test, which is the RCMP's physical obstacle course type test. That was their standard, still is,
Mhm.
in order to get into training, but then also you had to do it in a better time to leave training, right?
Okay.
So he was hell bent on doing that. So he says, Laurie, we're going to do this. And I remember him taking his, tearaway pants and pulling them off. And I remember thinking, like, I kind of want to look, but I'm really, really hesitant because I really did not want to
Oh,
see what my
yeah.
future was. It was a lot. It was a lot. So it was his fault, actually, that,
Oh,
yeah, I'll just blame him. If he was going to do it, then clearly I had to do it too. And
exactly.
so yeah, but there were a lot of dark times next. So while I can kind of say that he did inspire me immensely, and I in fact talk about him in my book because it was highly inspirational, but it was overwhelming. It was a lot of things, a lot of emotions kind of coming up right then. But I think that once I was released from the hospital and you're in such an enclosed environment, it's very controlled, then you get out into the real world and you start seeing some of the obstacles and how realistically you're going to navigate your life as an amputee in the world. And it was
Hmm.
really, really, really overwhelming. And that's when I really sunk low. That's the darkest time came in. I went home to see my parents for a bit of an early, kind of Christmas, and I stayed there through the holidays. And then in January, I moved back to Vancouver to start rehab, and my mom was coming out to live with me to be my full-time caregiver because I was completely incapable of looking after myself. And I remember we pulled up to the condo that had been rented for me, and I hadn't seen it, nor had she. Pulled up to the condo, and we're looking and all of a sudden I see that there's 37 steps up to my front door. I got one leg.
Somebody dropped the ball.
Yeah. So that was very overwhelming. So I take my crutches and I slowly get up the mossy kind of wooden stairs because it's all slippery and it's wet in Vancouver in the winter. And
Mhm.
so I finally get up the 37 steps to the front door, and I go into this furnished apartment, and nothing's mine, of course. And it felt very foreign and unfamiliar. And I was in the kitchen and I glance up, and there's a giant, extra wide, full length mirror in the kitchen. And I saw this person, like this pale person with one leg, like standing there. And I didn't even recognize myself. Like it was a lot. And I had a giant meltdown, and I threw my crutches and I said every curse word known to mankind multiple times, and just bawled in a heap on the floor. And I just said to mom, like, I just don't know. I don't know what's going to become of me. Like, it was awful. I felt shafted. I was bitter. I was angry. I was hurting. Like, I was in so much pain on every level. And it was just so much to see myself in this reflection because it just looked like a stranger.
Yeah. I mean, you had every right to feel the feelings that you were feeling. I
Hmm.
mean, that's for sure.
So I think after that, I sunk low. Like my physical pain was definitely not being controlled properly. Psychological pain was just not being controlled properly either. Um, I was very dependent. You go from being this independent, athletic, person, and now suddenly you can't even get into the shower without, I would crawl to the bathroom on my knees. Like, it was just so humbling on every level, and you lose all sense of dignity. You can't, when I was in the hospital, I mean, I fainted when I finally was able to get enough strength to get myself to the bathroom. I'm off a catheter and all that. And I finally get myself to the bathroom and I faint on the toilet. Like, it's just, there's just so many things that were so heavy.
Hmm.
And so I feel like it was January, the weather was gross. I was dealing with all the things that I just talked about. And I just had no hope. And I really sunk deep, dark depression, really hit me. And all I kept thinking was, I'm angry. Like I wanted to die. Like, why didn't I die that day? Like I should have died, and I want to die. I don't deserve to live. Like, this is no life for anybody. Um, and so I was bitter. I was very, very angry at the world, at my mom. I took it out on her because she was the person that was there. And I will always feel badly about that. But I couldn't get out of myself enough because I had no control over anything in my life. And it was a lot. So what I found myself doing was kind of self-medicating. And I think it was a feeble attempt to try to almost overdose, but I didn't have I guess the intention to really kill myself, but I kind of was making these lame, kind of feeble attempts to just slip away. Like
Right.
I remember lying there in my bed so many times thinking, well, I don't have a gun anymore, so I can't kill myself, and I wouldn't want to after what I'd just been through. I don't have the physical abilities to hang myself or something. Like, I just remember thinking all of the different ways that people, and I hate that I thought that way, but I also am almost grateful in some ways that I did feel that low, because I recognize now how much more joy the high moments bring me, if that makes sense.
Oh, it makes perfect sense. So
Yeah.
yeah, and I get it. I get it 100%. So
I
it's
th-
that especially the just trying to numb everything and slip away and not be there anymore.
Yeah.
You
And
know.
you don't want to cause pain to the people who are already suffering too, because while I was so hyper focused on my own shit and my own suffering, lots of the people around me were suffering too. But I wasn't
Yeah.
really, I wasn't thinking of them then. I was thinking just of me.
Well, and that's the thing is whenever you get into that spot and that mindset, that's what happens is, it's sounds kind of shitty to say, but it's very egocentric and very much selfish,
But you can't not
but
be
you
that
can't,
way.
yeah, you can't help it.
That's what suffering is.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that just sucks big
Yeah.
time. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't have better words to say for that.
And I mean, people say, like, why didn't, what do you think stopped you? And I don't know. I didn't have some big, you know, revelation that said, oh, Laurie, I didn't have any, deep philosophical moments to say that this is what was the turning point. I just didn't have any of that. I definitely self-medicated a lot. I would show up at my physiotherapy, and my physiotherapist would say, you need to go home. You're not in any shape to be out and about. And, but I just didn't have the capacity, and I guess I didn't have the will, thank God. That's all I can really say. But what I can say that I learned from that is that I understand that despair now. And I never did before, but I sure do now.
Yeah. So what finally, like, how long did all that last before you got your shit together?
I think I'm a people pleaser, and I'm a rulesy person. And so I think for me, I was very fortunate that the expectation was that I would be at physio every day. And so having that accountability, I know for me was critical. Um, because even though I was on my own, like my mom was there for the first while, but then as time went on, she left. But the expectation was that I would be there every single day. So I was expected. And then being accountable to somebody weighs on me. That's my responsibility. I can't let other people down. That's just how my character is. And
Mhm.
so I think that in and of itself was so significant, that routine, that having to be somewhere at a certain time. It kind of gave me something in my schedule to focus on. And so it was long. I remember because there were so many healing issues with my stump, and I had to go in for a few more procedures even after I was initially released from the hospital. I couldn't, I didn't have enough healing to be able to get a prosthetic leg. And that part was really discouraging because I felt like I was surrounded by all these people who are making all this progress and everybody's moving much more quickly than me. And yet I can't even get a leg. Like it felt like it was just another layer of being shafted kind of thing. Like, what? Like, how long am I going to have to wait? And I'd go into physio and I would do my stupid range of motion exercises and I would do like my upper body stuff. And one day during that phase, I remember, once I was getting way more, physically capable, I crutched 20 blocks just to prove that I could, because I didn't have any tangible goals that I could really achieve other than things like that. Like I wasn't learning how to really walk yet because I didn't have a prosthetic and stuff. So for me, putting those weird little intentions on the day gave me something to measure.
Yeah. Something
So
to
it was,
strive, a goal, something to strive for, something to look
yeah,
forward to. And yeah, no,
yeah.
I get that.
And I felt like, I think to me, um, it showed if I wasn't grinding every friggin' day, then clearly I wasn't committed. So are you just lazy and unmotivated, or are you grinding it out and are you proving to yourself and everybody else that you really want this? And so I would say I was definitely in that down phase for several weeks, and it was really gradual, my sort of coming out of it. But it also kind of coincided with getting a leg and sort of slowly regaining that independence, because the day that I actually got my very first prosthetic leg, it was like, ah, and I was scheduled to be on a talk show that day, back to my community minded behavior and how
Oh
I was
yeah.
always doing that.
Yeah.
Um,
It's almost like, cops and firemen put everybody else first and
yeah,
put their own needs last.
yeah,
That's crazy. I wish somebody would point that out.
yeah. It's true. We serve and we sacrifice, and lots of times it's to our own detriment, right?
Yeah.
Yep. So one day I was scheduled to be on this talk show and I was really excited, but I mean, I was still on crutches. I was practicing with a leg at physio, but I was not to be trusted to take the leg off campus, if you will. And so she would let me have it. And then she would make me put it on the shelf and I'd have to go home on my crutches and my wheelchair and stuff. And this day when I was going to the show, the production crew from this talk show that I was going on had sent a car for me and my mom to go on to transport me down to this show. And that was the day that my physio let me take it home with me. It was like this giant yay. Like I was so excited, like the smile, I couldn't even contain it. I was so excited to show it off on that talk show that day because I just wanted the world to see my new equipment. So that was pretty exciting.
Well, I mean, I would assume that it gave you another level of independence
Oh,
over crutches.
yeah, the
So
liberation, right? Like that feeling of, okay, there is some stuff, like I can get to places, I could just be, yeah, slightly more independent. And it symbolized a lot. It symbolized the future, and something I hadn't been able to really do. So as I started doing better with my leg, I started to I'd have lots of these challenges that I would do to myself. Like I would make myself go up the whole flight of stairs, like leading with my prosthetic leg every step to build that strength and to get that balance and all these things. So I would do these challenges. I still do them like all the time. I'm doing that when I'm in the kitchen. I'm doing weird little things and no one else would really know that I'm doing it, but I'm really conscious about how I shift my weight and how much time I spend sort of with, one hip jutted out and the other hip jutted out, that kind of stuff. So in those early months and weeks, I started to slowly regain my balance. And then once starting to walk a little bit, and then I wanted to walk without a limp. And then it was like, well, could I run? Could I rollerblade? Could I skate? Like, could I do all this swim? Like all those activities that I wasn't able to do. Like, but every single activity had to be broken down individually.
mhm.
And it was an eye opener because I didn't realize that I would have to put so much effort into doing one type of thing. Like I kind of thought, when you get injured, you do your rehab and then you're able to do all the things that you could do before. And that was a
Yeah.
really naive way of looking at it because that was sure not the case. So I had to break down all the things. And so during the rehab process, we had taken that pair test, that physical test, and we had broken it down into all the things, all the subparts of it to be like, okay, well, it's like a figure eight kind of test, and then like a running test, but then you jump a couple different obstacles and you have to leap a vault and you have to go up and down a set of stairs and you have to lie down and then get back up. And there's all kinds of different, like when you break it right down, it's a lot of different movements. And so in order to be efficient and technically sound at doing that test, for me, I had to break it down into all the individual parts. And so that's what we did. We would replicate it in the physio environment and try to work on each thing to do each movement as well as I could.
So what kind of support were you getting from the department? Like, were they supportive of you coming back, or did they set a time frame on you? And like, how did that process work?
The beginning was really difficult. And I think that I give the whole process and the people involved some grace now. At the time, I didn't. At the time, I was very angry. I was very upset. I was kind of fighty.
I'm sensing a theme here, Laurie.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like when I'm very morally driven, and when I feel like I've been failed on certain things, then I might turtle for a bit, but I always come out swinging, always. And I just can't really put a time frame on it, but I always will.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily a good thing. It's worked sometimes in my favor, but it's not always advisable. But it was hard. And I think it was new for everybody then too, right? But I didn't see that at the time. I mean, I'm from a small northern community. I know like, very few people in this organization. Now I'm in Vancouver. I don't know anybody. There's like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people here. I don't know. I don't have a frame of reference for how processes work in the bigger scheme of this organization that's humongous. So it was very overwhelming. And I felt like things should have fallen into place. Like I should have had answers about benefits and salary and who's paying my rent while I'm living in Vancouver, like just all these little things.
Yeah.
But in their defense, well, things like that didn't really happen that often. And every time they do, there are different dynamics and different factors and different people involved too. So it was very difficult to find some of the actual support. Like everybody's saying they support me, but when it comes right down to it, I couldn't get a lot of answers, and it was very frustrating for my family and for myself. So I eventually did get all the answers, but I think, and I'd like to think that, God forbid something like that were to happen now, I think it would be a lot more streamlined because of the internet too, like just all the things. There were lots of factors that were at play in 1998 that wouldn't necessarily be the same in 2022. So the support has wavered over time for sure. But I think that the idea of doing this test was always out there. Like I had to do that. And so I think that once the initial media interest, all that kind of died down, I think that fed into my darkness too, right? Like I was a center of attention for a long time, and not that I care about that. It was just that I had a lot of things to keep me busy. And then suddenly that part kind of goes away. Everyone gets back to their regular lives. And then now you're dealing with the shittiness and the realities of what your future is going to be. You feel very alone, very isolated, very psychologically stressed, very physically stressed. The pain, like just all that kind of stuff just really was like digging a hole and pulling in the dirt on top, right? Like it just, everything worked against me in that timing. And so I really didn't reach out for help. I mean, I had my people, like my family, so my closest friends, that kind of stuff. But once I was out of the public eye, I was really left to my own devices. And so I think that I really didn't have a ton of interaction with some of the decision makers until it got closer to the time. So in June, so I got shot at the end of November. And in June, I had a really poorly fitting prosthetic, but I was so done with physio. Like to me, it had felt like way longer, while it was only,
that's not
No.
a very long time to, I mean, like you said, you're talking about doing, tasks and having to break them down and relearn individual tasks. That's not a long time.
No, but when you're obsessed,
well, there is that.
And so in June, I felt like I just can't live. I don't want to be in Vancouver anymore. I felt like everything that had been so wrongfully taken from me, I gotta like regain this. So I went to the gym. My mom and my physiotherapist were the only two in the gym with me, and I started going around. The leg was not doing well. It was just a bad setup. I really shouldn't have done it, but I did it. That's what I thought. I thought if I passed the test, then at least I could put that whole chapter of my life behind me as well. And as I was going around, one of the obstacles, I kind of was trying to jump this stupid, just like a hockey stick essentially on two pylons. Like it's like knee height. It's so small.
Yeah.
And I tripped over it. And the stick felt like it made this giant echoey noise hitting the gym floor. And it just felt like the reverberation was just so profound and significant. And it just was exaggerated beyond. And I fell to a heap on the floor and I just bawled, and I kind of a theme again threw my leg and said, fuck this, I'm never coming back. I can't do this. I bawled. Like I just thought like this is way too much. Like I can't do it. And I left that gym saying, not happening. I'm done. I can't. I have to focus on something else. Policing is not going to be part of my future. I gotta refocus because this is not healthy for me. And so strategized about that a little bit the next week, like what next, like where do I go from here? And slowly my physiotherapist, who is much more than a physiotherapist, she's a psychologist and a counselor and oh my God, she's everything, a teacher, coach, but all kinds of things. And she slowly, without me really knowing, encouraged me to go back. And so in July, I had a much better fitting leg. She and I, just by ourselves, went back to the gym, thought that we were going to just be doing this test as a practice run. And she was videotaping it because that's what we did all the time. We videotaped everything so that we could break everything down and we could analyze it to death and try to figure out how we could do better. So that's
yeah, that is obsession.
yes.
I mean, it's great because I think it's very valuable because you get to look at yourself from an outside perspective, so you can see how everything looks. And, you can't do that whenever you're in the moment. So, I mean, that makes a lot of sense to do it that way.
Well, I mean, it was all for an amputee. It's about foot placement. It's about body placement. It's about just, I mean, the smallest adjustment to my prosthetic can have a really big impact on the rest of my body. It's been very incredible to learn about that. So we did the test that day and I,
Oh, you froze.
we finished it. And as I was done, I thought, geez, that was pretty fucking good. Like, oh, sorry. Am I good now?
Yeah, you're good now.
Yeah. Okay. So
Yeah.
so this day in July, like I went back, we did the test. And as I was kind of coming around the fourth or fifth lap, I was thinking, geez, this is pretty good. Like, I think I can do this test. We got done. And at the end, we were like, wow, that was pretty good. And so we submitted the video to the powers that be. And I waited, I don't know how long, but a couple of weeks, I think, and finally got the news that, yeah, that was good enough. And I had the authorization to go back to work. So I was absolutely exhilarated. I was thrilled beyond belief. And that was everything that I'd been working for. And while it doesn't seem long, when you're living it day in, day out, minute after minute, like it is a lot. And so the problem is that once they said, yep, stamp of approval, you did that physical piece, now all of a sudden they wanted me to do driving because it's my right leg. So they wanted me to do police driving. They wanted me to do the physical, it's like a use of force computerized simulator thing that they used back then it was kind of like a computerized scenario that would be run based on your responses and use of force. And so I did that, and I had to do shooting, had to go to the range and do my shooting, and then I had to go to a psychologist. So I had these 4 new roadblocks up against me, and I was furious. Like I thought for sure they wanted me to fail. Like I thought, you said for the last 8 months you got to do the pair. And so then I hide and I kind of go into like grind mode. And then I surface after all this time and I'm like, hey, by the way, I did the pair. And now all of a sudden they're like, whoa, wait a minute. Now you got to do these other 4 things. And I was so mad. So true to form, I did all those things. So it took me from, I don't know, mid-July, let's say, till September, I guess. to get all those things knocked off. So I got a psychologist to give me approval. I had to resit my driver's license, my regular driver's license. And then I went and did all the police driving tests as well. I did my computerized simulations, and I went to the range because I had already been to the range too, because I wasn't sure how it would be with guns and pistols and shotguns and all that stuff. Like, how would that impact me? And so I'd already been to the range before, but then I went and did my shooting qualifications and passed all that. And I finally, on October 4th of 1999, like 10 months later, went back to work. And so it was kind of an unprecedented return to work. I was the first, that we think possibly was definitely unprecedented. Nobody had returned to full unrestricted duties with an artificial leg in our organization at that time. So that was pretty incredible. You can clap now.
Yeah. Wow. In less than a year. I mean, that, number one, that's inspiring of, and the ups and the downs, and being honest about it of, yes, I was low, but then I just got to work, and then it sucked and I wanted to quit, but then I just got to work. And
I think one of the things though that's important too, Jeremy, is that the one thing that I would say is, like, it was all those things that you just said, but it's also been good, and then it's gotten bad again, and then it's been good. And so I think that's one of the messages that I think you and I are trying to share with people, is that it's always like this. Like, it's never just like this. Ever.
Oh yeah.
You don't just hit a low and then go like this. And you'd be foolish and naive to think that it did.
Oh yeah. The only easy day was yesterday to steal a line from a different organization. But yeah, I preach this, or I feel like I preach this all the time with, mental health and stuff, is the thing is to not quit. You have to keep trying, because not every person is going to respond the same to one type of, therapy option. There's, talk therapy, EMDR, neurofeedback. There's just, the list goes on and on and on of different types of mental health help and therapy practices and procedures. And what may work for you may not work for me, but you got to keep trying, and don't be afraid to go, okay, well, I'm not getting along with this therapist, or this therapist I don't feel like is helping me, or whatever. Don't be afraid to try another one out.
Exactly. I had to go through a lot of that myself. When I first moved to the place that I live now, I was struggling. I was getting divorced. I was having a lot of issues with my stump and circulation problems and things like that. Anyways, I reached out to somebody, and I had gone to see her probably 4 or 6 times, and she was still calling me Julie. My name's Laurie. And I felt like, if you can't even get my name straight, then what kinds of details are you actually retaining about my story and what I'm needing help with? And I remember in that really dark time that I was talking about, like right after my amputation, like I was at the lowest of lows, and I reached out to somebody who had come highly recommended to me, and I would take a taxi to the office, and I was bawling the whole way there, because that's all I did. I would bawl like all day long. That's what I did. I was so sad and so hopeless. And I would show up there, and that person would be answering the door for, like, letting the dog out to go to the bathroom, and, oh, forgotten kids lunch, and, oh, there's a delivery at the door. Like, it was just, and then I would leave in a taxi again, bawling, feeling even worse than I did when I arrived there. And I thought, what am I doing? I'm spending all this time so focused on, okay, I've got an appointment Tuesday at 2. And I would think, okay, I'm going to finally, like, maybe get some help and get some perspective and, like, try to make some progress. And I would leave feeling worse. And it was just absolutely devastating. Put yourself out there and just feel even worse.
Well, and yeah, especially with having, the personality type of someone that goes into one of these career fields. I mean, that's one of the biggest slaps in the face is, you're actually being vulnerable and seeking to get some kind of help, and they can't take the time.
Yeah.
And, that's why we talk a lot about cultural competency of having a therapist or a counselor that knows about the career field, and I'm not saying that, they have to be a former cop or a former firefighter or something like that, but they have to be able to understand, like, just the personality types of the people that go into those fields.
Yeah. And the
At the
pressures of these
very
kinds of
base.
jobs.
Yeah. And that's the bottom, the minimum standard, and then they need to know about, the type of calls that we run and the things that can happen to us, because it's not the same as the general population.
Agreed. And so
So,
delays in treatment are just absolutely unacceptable. And I think in every
yeah.
area we're all facing that. We don't have access in a timely fashion to the
Yeah.
appropriate kind of help. And that part is it's really got to change.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you've got an idea of how to change it, I'm all ears. And I can tell you from personal experience, my wife is a counselor, and her whole practice is built around firefighters, cops, and veterans. And she's booked out until January. And I mean, that was booked last month. So she's probably booked out till February now. I don't know. But there's not enough therapists just in general. And then whenever you have the population that we have and you need therapists that specialize in that, they're just, they're few and far between. And to make matters even worse is a lot of the times we don't do anything proactively, at least on the fire side. We're always reactive to everything. We get a call and then we go. It's not like, we think, okay, a fire's going to start here, so we're going to go and, be there before it starts. That just doesn't happen. And we do the same thing with our mental health. We wait until the wheels are falling off and it's a big ass dumpster fire on top of a shit show. And then we're like, okay, I need help now. Or we get forced to go get help. So, I
Yeah,
mean,
it's a struggle to find that competent help. You're right. And I think that's why back when I was in physio in those months, I was in a little support group, and it was very small. It was just two other people and myself. And we were all facing quite different, we all were amputees, but different other factors in our situations. And I remember kind of at the start thinking, I don't really know, like, what would I have in common with them? Because we're all facing different kind of paths. But what I did find out really quickly was just storytelling was a connection that I desperately needed. And I really think that you're providing that here. This is another way of doing that, right? Like, I'm not saying we're not, neither of us are out here trying to profess to be counselors or professionals in any way. It's just having another platform and another way to get a message out saying you're not alone, that there is help out there, that many, many other people have experienced the same things and come out on the other side. And something that we say might tweak with somebody else and be like, oh, I haven't thought about trying that. Like you mentioned EMDR. I don't know, maybe there's some listener who says, oh, I don't really know what that is. I'm going to Google it up right now. Like, you just never know. And I think that's what's really important about the power of storytelling and sharing our own lived experiences. That's got such tremendous impact for so many people.
Oh, absolutely. And, that's why we started, the guys that started the podcast with me. That's the whole reason we did it, is because, we've all been through our own thing, and each one of them was different, but all kind of, they kind of overlapped with a lot of things. But at any point in time, all of us felt alone. Like, we're the only person going through this, and what's going on? Like, where's the brotherhood? Where's the camaraderie? And like, I, you know, why am I the only one that feels this way? Well, in reality, you're not.
Exactly.
I mean, and to be able to come out and say that, and for it to be okay to say that, it's okay to not be okay. Again, another cliche line, but it's so true.
Yeah.
We all have things that we deal with, and it's a big sign of strength to be self-aware enough to go, okay, things aren't going right now. Let's figure it out. If I need, to go see a therapist, or if I need to talk to a peer, and maybe that's all it is I just need to sit down with a buddy or somebody who's in the same career field or an adjacent one, and, just kind of talk and hash things out and gain a different perspective. Sometimes that works. And then sometimes you let stuff boil up or build up too long, where you need that professional help, that outside perspective. But to get more people to acknowledge it and talk about it and say, look, this is where I was at. This is what happened to me. This is what I did. And this is where I'm at now. there's so much benefit in that. And I wish more people would come forward and talk about that. And thankfully, a lot more people are, but the stigma is still there
Yeah.
and it's still real. So
I
just,
think what I realize, I don't know if you feel kind of similar. I think you do. I think you're saying exactly what I'm about to say too. And it's just that I know that when I was first asked to give a presentation and back in 2000, like shortly after I'd gone back to work, and it was kind of like, rah, 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 look what you can do. Like you can overcome adversity, and like, look at, a one-legged cop here and look what you did. Like, really, that's how
yeah, dance pony.
yeah. And
Yeah.
so when I was prepping for this presentation, I thought I have no idea what do I tell them? Because what I felt like, while the end result at that point, the end result was me going back to work successfully, yes. However, I had just spent the last 12 months in complete and utter, well, many of them in complete and utter darkness. And I thought, well, like, what kind of a message is that, to go out in front of a group of people and somehow be like, yeah, it was shit, 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 more shit. And then all of a sudden I went back to work, like, yay. Like, I just did not really understand what they would want to know from me. However,
Mhm.
what I realized quickly was that that day I had spent all this time, like, it was in the community that I was from, and so everybody knew me, and so I selected these really nice dress pants, and I was wearing my high heel leg. I was all very excited about that, and I looked very professional. And so I go in and I talk about it, and the next thing you know, in the question and answer period, really they wanted to see the leg too. Like, there were a lot of questions around that, which I hadn't anticipated. Like, I thought that I need to be up there and be all professional. And next thing you know, I'm half disrobed showing them my leg in this like show and tell thing. But what
Yeah.
I realized, it was a big, big takeaway for me. And what I realized was that there are so many people in that audience who connected with me. And it wasn't because obviously no one had been shot in that audience. It wasn't that. Nobody needed to be shot or have some amputation or some major physical issue. It was the emotion. And that's really what I feel strongly about here, like 24 years later, where it's not the circumstances that necessarily bind us together. It's the emotions that those circumstances, the loss, the grief, the anger, the body betrayal, all of those things, we've all experienced that. Just doesn't really matter how they've arrived in our lives. It's how,
Hmm.
they're manifested differently for everybody. But we've all experienced those things. So while for me, it might be this, it might be, I don't know, death in your family, divorce. Like, I don't know what all the circumstances are, but that part, those details really don't matter. The things that bring us together, emotion.
Yeah. No, I agree.
That's why
100%.
we need to keep sharing our stories and our lived experiences, right?
Oh, absolutely. And and the other important part of it, I think, is showing the after, that it's okay to have those dark times and to go through those emotions. That's just part of the human experience, to, use another cliche. I love cliches today, apparently. But it's normal to feel happy or sad or angry or, betrayed, or just name the emotion. There's a name for it because it's normal. That's what happens. And it's okay, but you can't stay in it.
Yep.
That's where you talk about the growth aspect of it, of this is what I learned coming through this, and this is where I'm at now. And if you can take those lessons and pass them on, your money ahead, another
Yeah.
cliche.
Well, if we're going to start like value added and all, we're going to have all kinds of cliches, but we're all going to have setbacks too, right? But
Right.
experience will show us that we've had some very, very dark times, some really traumatic, upsetting, all the things. We've experienced all that, but to do another cliche, I've, I forget the one's called, experience will show that 100% of the time I've gotten through those. I messed that up. I messed that up. But you know what I'm
Yeah,
saying? Like,
well, yeah,
history
close
will
enough.
show, and that's what resilience is, right? Like, is you
Exactly.
prove to yourself from lived experience that, hey, you know what? I've made it through that. And I know that with some time and giving myself some kindness and some grace and reaching out for some help and sharing my story and doing all the things that I know I need to do using the tools that are in my tool basket. There's a cliche. Those kinds of things. But it's true. It's proof that I have succeeded, and you have too. but it's not always going to be an upward trajectory. It's going to be up and down and all around. And that's just life.
Yeah, that's life, peaks and valleys.
Yeah.
So enjoy the highs and know that the lows will pass.
Yeah.
And and I think it's a lot of people will kind of, it's very easy whenever you're in those lows to not really see that, that, oh, it's so bad. It's never been this bad before. Yeah, it has.
Yeah.
Because you're still here. And
well, yeah, one of the things that I always say too is, someone said it to me yesterday, something about how, well, I would never profess to know what it's like to, be an amputee. Like I could never compare my situation with yours. And I'm like, no, you got to stop that. Like I hate when people do that. There's no continuum. Somebody used the phrase, I was with a military vet recently. I hadn't heard it before, and he called it the trauma Olympics. And
yeah.
and I'm like, that was a great phrase. I had never heard it before. But the way I word it in my book is that there's no continuum about like what's the worst and what's the least bad, and like where do I land on this continuum, right? Because I'm not going to come on here and be, well, I'm in the middle. Well, Jeremy, he's only like halfway to the middle. Like he's kind of like his circumstances are like, we can't judge that stuff. It's foolish.
Yeah. Well, it's I like to use the kind of analogy of music, right? Everybody's musical taste is their own. You can't say that your taste in music is better than mine or mine is better than yours, because music is an intensely personal thing. And maybe that's just the way that I view it, and it's the same thing with any type of trauma. It's yours, and it's not for me to say or anybody else to say, how that affects you, or if it's mine is worse than yours or yours is worse than mine. The inpatient program that I went to was for firefighters, cops, and veterans. And one of my good friends that I made while I was in there, and we still talk and hang out and stuff, he was, in the Army and the Special Forces, and 18 years of that stuff will kind of mess you up a little bit. And so we're sitting next to each other, and they called us the angry corner. So yeah, that's the therapist that was there. He had a little nickname for us, and we were but we got to have a lot of good conversations. And for me, it was like, oh man, I haven't done X, Y, or Z, or I haven't seen this or that, and you've done all those things. And so I can't, what am I complaining about? And then his thing was, he would say the exact same thing to me of, I don't know how you do what you do, of going in, like, because I've been in the fire service as long as he was in the military. And so it's like the things that you saw on, a daily basis, and you're in the area all the time. Like it's the city that you live in, or the neighborhood you live in, even, that you're serving, and you drive by those houses every day and all that stuff. He goes, all the things that happened to me were halfway across the world. He goes, I don't have to be reminded of those places all the time. He goes, I don't know how you do that. And I was like, well, I mean, I guess when you put it that way, I see your point of view. I see my point of view. So maybe it is just, we have two different points of views, and the answer
landed us both in the same place.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, years ago, I worked with some guys with the military as well when we were planning for the 2010 Olympics and Paralympics. We were doing security stuff out here. And so that was a comment very similar to what your military friend said. He said, I find it really hard to wrap my head around. He said, when we go into theater or we're deployed somewhere, we know exactly kind of who our enemies are. Like we know who's on our side and who's not. And then we come back home, and that's where we're not in that same mindset. Whereas he said, you never know if it's your neighbor or your postman or somebody just, that you're going to meet at the store who hates you and is against you. And I had never thought about it like that. So it's saying the exact same thing. And it was quite an eye-opening conversation to really think about it like that.
Yeah. And and I don't think a lot of us really put a whole lot of thought into that. I think we just take it like, oh, well, this is just our career and this is just what it's like. I mean, for police officers to be hyper vigilant all the time, because it is, and they don't even realize that they're doing it.
Yeah.
You go out to a restaurant or something, or even have them over to your house, and they sit where they can see the door.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I get that, because I wanted that seat because I want to see the door, and I want to know where all the exits are, and I want to know, so yeah, it's
And I think that, hopefully we're doing better. I know we are in both of our worlds of work and things. I think we're doing a lot better about teaching the young people about resiliency and that all the signs and that for post-traumatic stress and things, because I do know, like, post-traumatic stress for me was just not a phrase that was used. I really wasn't familiar with it, I guess. And so when I was shot in 1998, I don't remember that phrase really coming up. And then in 2003, because I'm federal, I've got some coverage through the Veterans Affairs side in Canada as well. And a case manager person had come to my house, and at that time, I was newly married. I was pregnant with my first child. I had moved into a fairly new house. Like, things were on the surface going very, very well. But I had this visit at home from a case manager and talked about a variety of different things. And I didn't like that, because I didn't like people in my house, kind of back to what you were just saying. Like, I
yeah,
didn't want people in my space. This is my safe haven. I don't want anybody in here. But I felt like I had to, because of the coverage that I had through my benefits. So I did that. Next thing you know, at the very end of the meeting, I remember him saying gently to me, "Have you ever thought about, do you think that you might have post-traumatic stress? Have you ever looked into that?" And I never even heard of it. So I remember after he left thinking, oh, and so I went to check it out and checked the computer and did some of those I don't know, quiz things that you do.
hmm
Do you have nightmares? Do you have sleep issues? Are you hyper vigilant? Are you jumpy? Like, all these different things. And like every single one was yes. And I thought, okay, that's bullshit. I'll go to another quiz because this one will say that I don't. And every
yeah,
single one, of course, came back. So I was thinking, oh shit. But when I went to get counseling and actually got officially diagnosed, it was weird because it was kind of this double-edged sword. Like, I was grateful because I had an official medical diagnosis. So I felt like if I had that, then it felt like it was more legitimate or something. And it was, there was a category for that. So then at least if there's a name for it, then there's got to be a fix for it.
right,
But it was also scary as hell, because you're thinking, oh my God, what if work finds out? Am I going to get fired? Are they going to say, oh my God, she's weak, she's, not capable, all those things. So that was a whole other beast in and of itself. Scary, scary times. But I think we're doing better now because of how far we've come in the last 20 years, right? To sort of train and help our younger people build some of those skills and develop awareness about what to look for, hopefully.
yeah. But I think the awareness is definitely up, and I mean, hopefully the resilience is being built. Um,
I think resilience only comes
yeah,
with dealing with shit, though, right? And that only
yeah,
comes with life experience.
exactly.
Can't really teach it.
Yeah, that's just kind of one of those things that just it happens on its own, and because we've talked about that, and of how do we prepare uh new firefighters, right, for seeing the things that they're going to see. And I've talked to a bunch of people. I've talked to therapists. I've talked to other firefighters. I've talked to, cops and counselors and everybody. And I still haven't come up with a great answer. It seems like, you know, you can tell somebody what they're going to see, or what they're going to experience, but until they experience it for themselves, I don't think there's a real understanding. And I have a pretty good story about that. We had Rob Sanderson on the podcast. He runs an organization called Swell, which is Surf Waves Enjoy Life. And he came on and he talked to us about the organization. They take cops and firemen and veterans surfing, and they use it as kind of like a retreat, a getaway. There's some light mental health stuff that gets talked about, and there's a chaplain there, and um, so he talked about it, and I was like, okay, that sounds really cool, but yeah, we're in the middle of the country and there's no surfing anywhere close. He goes, I know. He goes, we do, it's an all expense paid trip. We go to California or, wherever. And that's how we do it. And I was like, okay, cool. So he calls me a little while later and he's like, hey, I want to take you guys out. I want you guys to come on a swell trip. And I was like, all right, cool, man. I've never thought about surfing, but sure, I'll give it a shot. And so, it took us a little while to get it together and actually do it. But we went 2 weeks ago, I think, or maybe a weekend ago. I don't know. It's fairly recently. So there's been a lot going on. But we get to California on a Friday and everything started off bad. 3 of the guys, their bags didn't make it, so they had to go back to the airport. We were supposed to surf on Friday, but ended up not because of the bag thing. And then we had to get to the beach house that they rented for us to meet with this counselor who was going to come talk to us about breath work and yoga and stretching and all that stuff. So I'm like, okay, this is cool. It was at that point, I'm still thinking, okay, this is more like a vacation really than, and I get it, leave your environment that is causing you the stress, take time and be able to reset. I get it. And then she comes in and she starts talking to us and she's talking about, all these different types of therapies, and then goes into the breath work and yoga. And then we go out onto the beach and, we're doing all these things out there, and we go back and my eyes are starting to open up a little bit. And then we go the next day and do the surfing and, paddle out on the board, and, you're nervous doing a new thing until, finally you surf a wave or you do whatever that new thing is. And you're like, okay, this is kind of cool. I'm not nervous about it anymore. So by the end of the day, I'm paddling out and just sitting on my board, hanging out and watching the waves, and so calm and peaceful. And then we go back to the house and we, cook dinner together and just hang out and talk with the chaplain. Do the same thing on Sunday. And, Monday is just kind of the get ready and come back home day. So I get back home, or we're flying back on the plane, and me and Rob are talking. And I was like, do you know what? I get it now. I get the whole process and what you guys have set up with having the therapist there in a non-threatening way.
Yeah.
And then having the chaplain there talking about, because the chaplain, this guy's awesome. He's a former SWAT guy, retired. And like, he is not like any chaplain you've ever seen. I mean, he's definitely a cop for sure. But he was just straight to the point and just super personable, and took a lot of his time out of his weekend just to hang out with us. But anyway, so I'm talking to Rob on the plane ride back, and I'm like, this is a really sneaky way to get guys to finally admit to themselves that it's okay to go to therapy, isn't it? And he goes, yeah, maybe it is, maybe it's not.
I'm not here to tell you what your takeaway is,
yeah.
but
I was like, touche, sir. Well played.
Yeah. Symbolic, right? So
Exactly.
Yeah, very effective.
Yeah.
That's
So
awesome.
I took the long way around on that story. So unfortunately, but yeah,
No,
and that's
good.
so, but that's the thing is, going back to that point we were making earlier of, it's got to be made clear to everybody that it's okay. It's okay to ask for help. I know that we're supposed to be the ones that, oh, we're the helpers. We don't need any help. It's okay. Everybody needs help at some point.
Absolutely. We need to have so many, periodic check-ins and all that kind of thing too, that I think are more well established now than they ever were, certainly at the start of my career. I'm sure same with you, right? Where every, I don't know, 6 months or a year, whatever it is, you have to go in, and instead of just going in for your regular physical, you got to go in for a head check too. Like, it's just, those should be standard procedures now.
Yeah, I agree. They should be. And I think for a lot of police departments, they are. I don't know any fire department that's doing that.
Really?
Yeah.
That's got to change.
It does. We've lost more firefighters to suicide than line of duty deaths for I I read a white paper that was from a couple of years ago, but it was, I mean, for the past 10 years, I think every year we lose more firefighters to suicide than to line of duty deaths. And they actually think that the number's probably
Or
twice
higher.
as high.
Absolutely. Because I mean,
So
and even you think about the reporting, you know, even in the policing world, I think we're getting better at considering the circumstances behind these deaths. But um, people in the past, you know, historically, people didn't want to put up their hand to go, yeah, like my brother, sister, father, whatever, did this because of mental health, right? It would just be like died suddenly, and then you were left to kind of wonder what that suddenly actually meant. And I think some families, I've read some more recently, some families going out there and saying, like just changing the wording and the messaging and the narrative around the circumstances. And I think that's tragic. Obviously, we don't want any more, but I mean, it's
yeah,
helpful in normalizing it a bit more and not feeling like there's this shame around the fact that um, like the circumstances by which someone died. Like it's just, it shouldn't be like that.
yeah. Well, and I think hopefully what can be taken away from those situations is if you look back and examine, you can say, okay, these were the signs that I missed, and I'm not going to miss those signs with the next person. So hopefully it would make us more aware and more vigilant and more willing to have that conversation with our friends. You know, the people on your shift, the people on your crew, you know, the officers that you're going on calls with. Yeah, it's an uncomfortable conversation to have. I mean, it really is, but it doesn't have to be. And it doesn't have to be. I think sometimes it gets blown up into this whole big thing. Like, I think you do need to be direct about it, but also there's a way to approach it of how you doing, and don't accept the I'm fine. You know, the one or two word answers. That's an indicator.
Yeah.
So actually be invested in the conversation, and I think you'll get better results that way.
I think that point's so important too, because while I'm a big advocate for learning how to um, speak up and advocate for yourself, really, you know, reach out for help, all those kinds of things. Yes, all that's important. However, we're not capable of that when we're in our really dark times. We just aren't.
Yeah.
We don't know how to do that, nor do we feel comfortable. I mean, even if we knew where to turn, which most of the time we do know in this day and age, we do know where we could turn. We've got some options. I think that stuff's more readily available than it was, but you don't have that capacity. And I think that's the biggest thing that sometimes I wonder, like when I give that message, when I'm doing my speeches, you know, learning how to advocate for yourself. Yes, that's very important, 100%. But it's also up to our family, friends, colleagues to notice those subtle behavior differences too, because we just don't, we just can't sometimes. We just don't have that ability to reach out and do that for ourselves when we actually need it the most. And so that's when we need to rely on those other people and their awareness of our our behaviors in order to for them to step up and say, you think you might need to, you know, are things okay, and should we be delving into this a little bit differently,
Yeah.
because it's difficult. I think sometimes we feel almost embarrassed or ashamed of that inability to advocate for ourselves when we feel like we know we can and we take control at work and we are in these sort of positions of power or
Yeah.
something like, or authority, not power necessarily, but positions of authority, as then we're weak or um, not just I don't know, not capable of doing it when it comes time for ourselves, and the fact that we need it for our individual sanity.
Yeah. Well, you know, I mean, the job is the last thing that suffers with most of us. You know, we're always able to put our game face on and go play.
Yeah.
But, you know, we have a saying on our department, and I'm sure there's plenty of departments that have the same saying of see something, say something, you know, and we use it as like a safety thing for the fire ground. You know, that means from the brand new firefighter all the way up to the senior chief. If there's something going bad on the fire ground and you see it and you recognize it and nobody else has, then speak up and say something.
Yeah.
And we need to start applying that to, our mental health department wide, job wide.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
agreed.
So, well, I think that was pretty good.
Yeah.
Do you have any closing thoughts?
Um,
Oh, wait, before we do closing thoughts, where can people find your book?
oh, thank you. Yeah, so it's called 1033, and officer steps back up. And so, of course, the 1033 I mentioned means officer down. That's the radio code. And the steps back up is to do with obviously my prosthetic leg. You can buy it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. Yeah, online is probably the easiest way. And I really appreciate that support. Thank you.
Cool. Well, I'm looking forward to reading it. So
Thank you.
I think I'll get it ordered tonight and get it here. I probably should have ordered it and read it before I had you on the podcast.
That's okay. Like I said before we start, and if you ever want me to come back, I happen to be available.
Well, I think I definitely would like you to come back on, probably 4 or 5 months from now, and then we'll do this again, and maybe we'll have some answers.
Oh, yeah, we'll fix the world here. Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
appreciate it. And thanks again to Mike connecting us. I do appreciate that a lot too.
Oh yeah, he's a stand-up guy, so I like him a lot. So back to closing thoughts.
I think just know that you're not alone. I mean, that's a cliche for sure, but you aren't alone, and there is always hope. There's always.
Nope, you froze up a little
Yeah,
bit
I know.
there.
Yeah, I saw that too. Um, yeah, no, I just was just gonna say that um, you're never alone. That is a cliche, but you are never alone, and that there is always hope.
Well, that is good advice, and kind of feeds into usually my closing line there of if you are struggling, reach out. There are resources available. You aren't alone. You're not going through this. You're not the only person who has been through something like this. If you know somebody that is struggling, reach out, let them know you care, let them know there are resources out there. Um, yeah. And thanks for stopping by, and we will see you next time.